Yeah, I mean, there's a political problem with that, obviously, right? Which is that if deterrence works, you never see it work.
That's right. It's the dog that doesn't bark. It's the exactly. And so I think right now that political problem is being solved for us, however, by our friends Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and the Ayatollah and Kim Jong-un. Right? I mean, they are. Kim Jong-un is not only one of the key suppliers of ballistic missiles and artillery shells to Russia for its war, but now they've committed to sending combat units. So you're going to have North Korean soldiers fighting in Europe in the largest war in Europe since World War II, and we haven't imposed any cost on them for that. We're just letting this snowball gather more and more and more mass as it's rolling down the hill towards us. But we can see that snowball. We can see that beginning of this avalanche, such that I think we can solve the political problem of people not being able to connect those dots.
I mean, we were talking before, Chris, you and I were talking about the kind of libertarian, ish or isolationist idea that a lot of people, a lot of Americans are we don't want to, why should we do this? We need to mind our own business. And I think it's interesting that you talk about this because that may be the communication thing. Americans, do they know what deterrence is? Do they understand that it's not just coincidence that there haven't been major wars, in the last...
Yeah.
And that they don't see that there is this axis of very powerful authoritarian countries who are unwilling to just, hey, America doesn't want to do anything, fine, let's just let them alone.
Yeah. So look, it takes a certain amount of education. The fact that we haven't, I would consider both Iraq and Afghanistan to be, forgive the phrase, small wars. Not, these were not great power wars. They were very costly wars for us, but they were not anything like the 20th century wars that we fought in the Great War and the Second World War, the Korean War, and even Vietnam. So it's been a long time since Americans have known neighbors who've had to go off and fight a major war, and that does contribute to a sense of complacency or misunderstanding about the nature of deterrence, or just how powerful of a role deterrence has played in delivering this long period of relative peace that we've enjoyed. But that period has ended. It has ended. And we are now seeing in both the spread of war and the intensification of it. And given that we have not been willing to back red lines, like the one that President Biden drew for Xi Jinping 2 years ago, it invites and encourages those wars to further intensify and spread. And that is the very vicious cycle that we're now in. So I think we just need to educate ourselves. People need to talk about this. We need to see leadership from elected leaders in this country. We need to see people reading more history again. Universities don't even teach much history anymore. It's shocking to me that history used to be a really popular major at universities, and it has atrophied. Things like political science have gathered more student majors as history has declined. I talked to a very bright undergraduate at Stanford University just last week who was a history major, and he told me that in his class at Stanford, I can't remember, I think Stanford's 7,000 undergraduates, give or take. He says his class, there's only 20 history majors in his class, and that the Stanford history faculty outnumbers the number of history students in his class. This is not a good, like Samuel Clemens said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it frequently rhymes. We would really do ourselves a favor to be reading about even just 20th century history. I just recently reread William Manchester's second volume of his biography of Winston Churchill, which is called it's on my desk here, The Last Lion, Alone, 1932 to 1940. So this is the history of the 1930s and all of the mistakes that the Allied democracies made in not standing up to Adolf Hitler at every opportunity when they could have made life hard for him, maybe even fatally so. If we had gotten our act together when he moved into the Rhineland, it's quite possible that Hitler would have been destabilized politically at home if he had been confronted, but he wasn't. No one had the stomach to confront the bully until we had a massive war that killed tens of millions of people.
And ultimately, the first nuclear war, although it was only us bombing one of the axes, but that kind of leads to a issue that a lot of Americans are concerned. A lot of people are concerned about, which is this prospect of, if we go to war with China, it could be a nuclear war, and nuclear war is terrifying.
I definitely remember reading a few years ago some opinion article in Business Insider or something that was like essentially making the argument that we should not defend Taiwan because it may trigger a nuclear war with China. Right.
Yeah. Now you do address this in your book. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I mean, look, one of the negative lessons that Xi Jinping has probably drawn, negative from our perspective, from the conflict in Ukraine, is that nuclear blackmail seems to work against skittish Americans, and I think that we should not be so quick to throw ourselves under our desks into the fetal position, suck our thumbs because we're so scared of Vladimir Putin saber rattling with his nukes. I don't believe that Vladimir Putin is suicidal. I think he's reckless. I think he's made a bad gamble, but I don't think he's suicidal. I don't think Xi Jinping is suicidal either. And so we need to keep in perspective that nuclear weapons are really a psychological instrument of war, as opposed to a practical instrument of war. And so it'd be good for us to keep that in mind. Yeah, well, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. There was something interesting in your book about when you were talking about some of the impacts that, like, if China were to take Taiwan, some of the impacts that would have, geopolitically, economically around the world. There's an interesting part about nuclear proliferation that I hadn't considered before reading this. Could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, look, remember, Taiwan had made a couple of attempts during the autocratic period under the Kuomintang, before Taiwan emerged as a full democracy in the 1990s. Taiwan made two attempts at acquiring nuclear weapons, and the United States put the kibosh on that in both instances. Same is true of during the autocratic period in South Korea as well. If Taiwan is coercively annexed, that will send a very loud signal throughout the world that America's security guarantees may not be enough to rely on, and including our extended deterrent guarantee. Extended deterrence is the term of art that refers to American guarantees that our allies who do not have nuclear arsenals would be protected under the U.S. nuclear arsenal if common adversaries were to attack those countries. And so I think that in the aftermath of Taiwan being forcibly subjugated, you would see a very strong temptation on the part of a lot of countries to acquire their own nuclear deterrent. Japan has all the material it needs to develop a nuclear arsenal, but has no desire to do that, and no political mandate to do that. That might change very quickly in the aftermath of Taiwan being conquered. Same with South Korea, where people actually do talk openly. Unlike in Japan, there's a public debate in South Korea about whether South Korea should acquire nuclear weapons in light of the fact that their foe across the 38th parallel right above them has nuclear weapons in North Korea. I think that they would work quickly to try to develop a nuclear deterrent. Vietnam, perhaps. But this has knock-on effects then into places like the Middle East, where if Iran achieves this nuclear breakout, which we have, I think, irresponsibly allowed things to go this far. I'm very disappointed in I give President Biden credit where it's due on some aspects of his China policy. His Iran policy has been gravely irresponsible. It has given Iran access, basically to a lot more money, a lot more resources, to wage proxy wars around the region that are now playing out, but also more money for his nuclear program. So I think that, Iran may then sprint towards a nuclear capability with knock-on effects on some of the Arab neighbors like Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So it's not a great it's not a great development to see the horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons to a lot of other countries, some of them rather unstable countries. So that is one of the effects that we talk about in the second chapter of the book.